Hi everyone, it's great to be here. So I'm actually going to start with some familiar faces. You might have seen these guys somewhere before if I have a clicker that can forward us to their faces, which I do not. So either someone up there is going, oh beautiful, is going to move it for me, that's fantastic. So we have the magnates, Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, and also the AI thinkers, Nick Bostrom and Ray Kurzweil. And they all have something in common. They're very, very interested in the singularity, that hypothetical moment where we create a machine intelligence so much greater than our own, so infinitely more capable that it will overthrow the human race. And in fact, Elon Musk is so concerned that he's spending millions of dollars trying to prevent this. But they also have something else in common. Can you notice what it is? Take a guess. Yeah. So they're all men, and in addition to that, two of them are billionaires, and at least one of them is a millionaire. So we might be noticing an interesting pattern here, which is that the singularity can seem like a big problem if you're a rich white dude. But let's be fair. This might actually make some sense, because if the sound of a dominant, artificially intelligent apex predator sounds particularly frightening to you, it's because you're currently the apex predator. What I would like to suggest is that for the rest of us, those threats are already here. Because if what the singularity theorist fears most is the exploitation and marginalization of humanity, that's already happening. It's just, in William Gibson's term, unevenly distributed. So I tend to think that the hype about the singularity is actually hiding the real problem. The issue is not the superintelligent agents of the future. It's the inequality that we're embedding in our systems today. Because, of course, AI is already here. Not the self-aware kind, of course. I'm talking specifically about narrow AI, the kind that helps us perform tasks. Now, some of these systems have names, Cortana, Siri, Alexa, but there are many, many faceless back-end systems that you may not even be aware that you're using every day. And their intelligence, such as it is, relies on ingesting as much data about you as possible. We've created these twin imperatives, an engineering imperative and a business imperative. The engineering side is the more data we have about you, the smarter the underlying machine learning model will be. From a business side, the theory goes that the more data you have, the more the market will value your company. So we've basically brought together this system that is designed to ingest as much data as possible to improve the machine learning underneath. But this is also creating a shift in terms of how we understand ourselves and other people. It's a shift from human subjects to data subjects. Let me give you an example of what this looks like. This is a refugee camp holding Syrian refugees, some of the millions that are currently fleeing a war zone. But it is also the site of an enormous machine learning experiment. So a client approached IBM and said, "We're noticing that some of the people coming off the refugee boats are looking suspiciously healthy. Could you possibly design a machine learning model that could divide the real refugees from the potential terrorists?" And IBM said, well, yes, we can. And what they did is that they brought together basically a demonstration system that is being fed by data from the dark web, so the sort of place you might go to buy a fake passport, along with data from Twitter, the sorts of things that people are liking, and then along with the sort of data that you might have if you're a border guard. And from this concoction, they put together what they call a terrorist credit score. They're very clear to point out that this is not a definitive marker of guilt or innocence, but what it is an incredibly intimate portrait of somebody, their name, their family, their previous employers, their entire social graph. And from this, they boil it down to a risk score about whether that person is going to be a future jihadist. So there are many things to say about this, not the least of which is the possibility for spurious correlations, or how on earth you would actually verify these predictions. Certainly in my research over the last few years, I've been looking specifically about how bias creeps into large-scale data models. But I'd actually suggest we'd have to start with a due process question here. How would you know your terrorist credit score? How would you find it out? How would you check what kind of data they were using about you, or look at its validity, or even contest the finding? But this is just one of many systems that different companies are producing, unverified systems to determine people's guilt or innocence. And they're being produced by proprietary systems that we can't look inside, and they're being produced in such a way that the accused can never see the data that's being generated about them. Ultimately, we're testing these systems on the most vulnerable populations and the people who are least likely to be able to object. This is what IBM said about it. They said that their I2 system doesn't collect intelligence, it just helps ingest and make sense of unstructured data. They aren't spies or agents or operatives, they're just engineers. Feel better now? Yeah? Yeah? It's all okay, right? Well, I don't find this immensely comforting, but what it is a very carefully constructed argument. What they're saying is, we're not collecting your individual PII, we're just getting all of this trace data. It's really neutral, it's scientific, it's engineering. I'd like to suggest that it's not, that it's actually deeply political. And we have to look very closely at the construction of systems that claim to be allocating culpability to humans. So we're all becoming data subjects, but some of us are going to be experiencing the downsides more than others. So instead of worrying about the singularity, I think what we need to be doing is researching the impacts on data subjects today. And we've had two extraordinary examples that just went public in the last month. There was this one. This came from a Bloomberg investigation where they looked at the availability of Amazon's same-day delivery service. And what they found is that in cities around America, in neighborhoods that are predominantly black and working class, they were far less likely to have same-day delivery. And this matters because if you live in a food desert where you can't really get fresh fruit and vegetables very easily, same-day delivery can make a real difference to you. Now, if you look at my old hometown of Boston, you can see Roxbury, which is a working class, predominantly black neighborhood, is the only place where you can't get same-day delivery in that whole area of the city. So it's pretty extraordinary. And it was very, very heartening to see that Amazon actually responded to this investigation by saying that they were going to address this problem. So they're now trying to roll out same-day to those areas that are all of the blank spots in the map. But you might notice something interesting. This map looks eerily similar to the Federal Housing Administration maps of the 1930s and 40s. Those maps where they used to take big red pens and circle the working class black neighborhoods and deny mortgages to people living in those areas. So we see the ghosts of discriminatory systems past live on in these digital instantiations. Then I'm guessing almost everybody in this room has read this story. This is the extraordinary ProPublica investigation of risk assessments in the criminal justice system. And they did a study over a year looking at the North Point software system, which basically is being used by judges around the country to decide when to let people free. And it predicts which people will be violent future criminals. And what ProPublica found is that this system is getting it right only around 20% of the time, and that it is falsely flagging black defendants as potentially future violent criminals at twice the rate of white defendants. This is a significant error and a serious problem. And we need to look at systems like this because, first of all, they're already affecting the lives of people now, and secondly, because they're the precursors of the AI to come. So what are we going to do about it? Well, one of the systems that people have looked to, particularly to protect us from these kinds of issues, has been privacy. But I'd like to suggest that privacy isn't the right framework. Basically, the 20th century model of privacy, the threat model, was that I take information from you, I go through a notice and consent procedure, and then if I do something wrong with that information, you have a case against me. And there was this traditional three-part model of how information is used. It's collected, it's processed, it's disclosed. But that three-part process, I think, has broken down. What we're looking at now in our era of machine learning is actually something far more complicated, which is that I don't even need to collect your data anymore. I can infer it from your social graph, from a whole range of different traces. And then, of course, there's all that behavioral data. Every time you click on something, read something, buy something. But there's also really intimate emotional data from your face when you walk past a facial recognition camera, or from your galvanic skin sensor in your wearable fitness band. So put this all together and we start to see something that Jason Schultz and I have described in a research paper as predictive privacy harms. Harms that come from data practices that live outside of the current framework of privacy law, but are nonetheless based on data which is as intimate as your medical records or your diary. So as we're coming up against, I think, the hard boundaries of privacy law, people are starting to turn to ethics. And I actually think this is a really good thing. But we need to do a lot of work to get this right. And I'm hoping everybody in this room are the sorts of people where we can work on this together, because this is a collective problem. Over the last year, I've been working with Jake Metcalf on a program which has actually just been released in a journal article, where we're looking specifically at the history of concern about ethics. It spikes at periods of enormous scientific and technological change. But if you really want to create an ethics code, it takes a crisis. So if we go back to World War II and Nazi experiments, then we saw the creation of the Nuremberg Code in 1949. And then we had a series of terrible sort of medical experiments in the 60s and 70s, which really produced the Belmont Report in 1979, still a very important document in this space. And of course, we had bioethics, created as a very rigorous and important field in response to the emergence of genetics. And I think we're having a similar moment now, that basically data ethics is growing in response to the crises that we're seeing in terms of how people are being affected by large-scale data systems. But we need to do it right, because ethics is already being pulled in different directions. At one end of the spectrum, we have people who want to see it become basically very limited to corporate compliance. And on the other end, we have the singularity guys who basically say ethics is really about just preventing the robot apocalypse. But I'd like to suggest there's actually a third way of thinking about this, that we can use data ethics as a way of producing rigorous studies of the kinds of discrimination, unfairness, and inequity in the systems that we're using today. So I'm going to end today by going back to the beginning and the rich white dudes and ask, who is going to design the AI future? Because it could look something like this. And what worries me is that AI systems reflect the values of their creators. So it matters who runs these companies, who sits on the ethics board, and whose vision of the world is getting modeled. Otherwise, we run the risk of creating AI that has such a narrow and privileged vision of the world with the old familiar biases and stereotypes baked right in. So we need to do much, much better on diversity and inclusion. Because in the end, I have to say, really frankly, the worlds of machine learning and AI are very white and they're very male. And we need more perspectives in those rooms really urgently, because they're building the worlds that we're going to inhabit, and we want to make sure that that's somewhere we want to live. Thanks.